how good are you at setting boundaries? Today's video is all about how boundaries can actually help us build better relationships. The reality is so many of us want better relationships with our partners, our children, our families, our colleagues and coworkers. And believe it or not, boundaries are such a huge tool in helping to build better relationships. And even as a parent, one of the most useful things that I ever learned was children need boundaries. They need the structure. In fact, often when children are acting out, they are seeking boundaries on some level. It's a way that they begin to feel safe. Okay, so this is for anybody with all relationships. And it's the same thing with partners. Your partner can't read your mind and isn't always sure what you want, no matter how obvious you think it is. So today's video, I'm going to go through a number of steps for how boundaries build better relationships, the kinds of things that setting boundaries can help with, okay? So if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so. This channel is all about supporting women to feel more empowered in their life, in their work, and really live in alignment with the best of who they are. All right, so the first piece around this idea of how setting boundaries builds better relationships is clarity. No one can read your mind, okay? If you think that people just should know, that people should do everything the way that you do, or that that's just how it should be, chances are you're going to find yourself very, very disappointed, okay? I am here in the Adirondack Mountains visiting family, and when you visit family, it can be challenging. It can be challenging in the sense that not everyone knows what your boundaries are. Not everyone knows what your needs are. And if you don't communicate them, or at least be willing to say yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no, then nobody's going to know your boundaries, okay? And people get upset, people make assumptions, they pass judgment, they don't know the whole story. So when you have clear boundaries, you create clarity in the relationship, right? When you know that you don't do certain things or you will only do certain things, then, and you communicate it, communication will be another topic that I do a video on, but when you communicate your boundaries, that's also very, very critical. And so this video is not so much about the communication tools, but just the ways that boundaries can help build better relationships. And it goes without saying here that if you're going to have the boundaries in a relationship, they need to be communicated. You can't just assume people know what your needs are, okay? So that's the first piece, is that boundaries help build clarity and create clarity, both for yourself and for those around you. And when everybody's clear, nobody's assuming, nobody's going to pass judgment or wonder what you're thinking or why you're doing something. You don't have to explain yourself with everything, but when you set a clear boundary that says, no, this is not what I choose to do, then people will know that, okay? And it becomes very easy to be in relationship with you. The next one is when we set clear boundaries, in terms of how it builds better relationships are such a powerful way for us to practice boundaries, okay? And we already are building better relationships because of the clarity piece, but also we want to know that we can build them because of practicing, okay? We can practice our own confidence, our own sense of self-esteem, our own sense of self-worth. And when we have that, when we're willing to practice that, the relationships improve, right? There's a consistency. So it's both an opportunity to practice being in relationship with others and setting boundaries, but when you practice, it builds the relationship. It helps the relationship, it improves the relationship, okay? Another big piece of how boundaries build better relationships is that it's an act of staying in yourself, okay? I know myself, and I'm sure many of you watching might feel the same. When you are in a family situation, it's difficult for family members to think of you differently than the way they thought of you when you were growing up. And if you've been on a journey of personal growth and development, you've probably changed an awful lot. There are probably even things that maybe you regret having said or done when you were younger. And your family might still think of you that way. In fact, they might even still bring up old things, right? But when you have clear boundaries that you're not going to engage in those conversations, or you're not going to, do the same thing by bringing it up for others or whatever, like that can be an inner boundary that you set for yourself, both in terms of how you're going to show up and how you're going to respond if somebody else acts differently than you want them to, okay? So it really helps you to stay in yourself and not get caught up in old dynamics or situations that really don't suit you, right? Another aspect of boundary setting and building better relationships is that when you set boundaries for yourself, it's an act of self-care. And when you are in self-care, you're better able to care for those around you, whether it's your partner, your employees, your colleagues, your family, your children, etc., right? You set boundaries of self-care. I know for me, when I do my Sacred Nights of Winter journaling, that began long before I started publishing a journal. And I had the boundaries that when I'm sitting and journaling, and I often would wake up early in the morning before anyone else in the house, including my children, I would not allow anyone to interrupt me, right? That was my boundary. And I knew that I was filling myself up. And it was an act of self-care to do that for myself, to take care of myself, to nurture myself, okay? So this is another piece here. I'm just going to move a little bit. I'm in these gorgeous mountains. I'll get to show you some more of the magic and the beauty. Got the river behind me and the woods. When you set boundaries, you're better able to care for yourself. And when you care better for yourself, you also then allow your family to understand, to be accepting of your self-care, to be allowing of it, and even your colleagues and whatnot. People know what is too much and what is not enough, and you're clear about it, and you're taking care of yourself. So that takes me to the next piece, which is also self-support, okay? Boundaries are like the riverbanks, right? Here we are on this beautiful river, right? I'm going to turn for you. We're on this beautiful river, but that river can't be flowing without the riverbanks, right? Otherwise it would be a big puddle on the ground, right? And so there's an aspect of support or structure where you give yourself that support and that structure, those riverbanks, which is very masculine on many levels, okay? But that is needed. You need those boundaries for the feminine flow, for the essence of your being, for the wild, true nature of your true self to flow through, all right? And so it's not just an act of self-care, it's also an act of self-support. So it gives you these boundaries through which you can act and flow in your life effectively, all right? And that brings me to another way that boundary setting helps build better relationships, and that is self-nurturing, okay? So these three, this self-care, self-support, self-nurturing, those are all ways in which you get to show up better, and then by default, that automatically improves the relationship, okay? When you're doing that for yourself, people know it, you have consistency, you're nurtured, you're fueled, you're not drained and overwhelmed and exhausted all the time, because you're setting boundaries, right? And that keeps you from snapping at others. It keeps you from kind of pushing other people's buttons or getting extra triggered or easily triggered by others, right? All of these pieces really, really help. And so then that brings me also to the idea of self-limits. When we are setting boundaries, we are also setting limits for ourselves, right? We understand what we're able to do and what we're not able to do, what we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do. When you know this, those around you will understand, okay? When you know there's a boundary that says, I'm not okay having certain things happening in my home, or I'm not okay with certain interactions at work, or I'm not okay with certain foods or certain ways of doing activities or whatever it is. Like when you're really clear about your limits and what you're willing and not willing to do, it's really clear, right? If you communicate with others what your limits are, like, using my family vacation as an example, if I'm with family and they all want to go on a roller coaster, okay, I don't want to go on a roller coaster. That's not my choice. That's a limit for myself. If I'm really clear about that, there's not going to be extra discomfort or pressure or guilt or shame or whatever, and you can just stand in that. Now, I can do other videos later on about how to set those boundaries, how to be clear and communicate those boundaries. But I just wanted to share today the importance of having boundaries in order to build better relationships. When you have that structure for yourself, when you have those boundaries, when you are clear in yourself about how you want to show up, who you want to be, how you want to live and express in your life, that's going to make all the difference in the world in terms of how happy you are, how your relationships unfold, and how you see yourself and how others see you. All right, I hope that helps. If you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so and look for the next videos. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.